Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. I'm a past member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee, and currently I serve on the MS Society's Community Review of MS Research Committee. I'm a district activist leader and trustee for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to give us a place for the MS community to connect, and to connect you with experts who are ready to answer your questions on the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. Please feel free to post your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. MS navigators are online throughout today's program, answering questions, connecting you to resources. Difficulty in walking, also known as problems with gait, is one of the most common mobility challenges in MS. Gait problems may cause a person to walk unsteadily, they may trip or stumble, and they may wind up feeling less confident in their ability to move around. Today, we're talking with Dr. Nora Fritz about walking difficulties, fall prevention, how to manage problems with your gait, and what experts are learning from the latest research in this area. Dr. Fritz is an associate professor in the physical therapy program in the Department of Healthcare Sciences and the Department of Neurology, as well as a director of research for the Department of Healthcare Sciences at Wayne State University School of Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Fritz. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to see you again.
To start us off, can you give us a definition of gait and explain what parts of the body contribute to our gait?
So as you said earlier, John, gait is just another name for walking. And I think we typically think about walking as this kind of lower extremity or leg driven activity, but really walking is a whole body activity. There's a bunch of different systems that contribute to walking, including strength in our legs, the coordination and timing that we need for smooth and energy efficient walking, sensory function to know where our limbs are in space, the postural control for our trunk and balance in our legs and our trunk, and arm swinging for efficient walking. We also use vestibular control, which is like from our inner ear for balance and keeping our head steady during walking. So all of these systems interact and contribute to smooth and energy efficient walking.
We heard from Alex, who believes the damage to his nerve pathways make it difficult for him to walk, but he's wondering if there may also be other factors that can contribute to gait problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Alex, his interpretation that delays in or lack of nerve signals getting to the target muscles could certainly lead to problems with walking or to efficient walking. And that can result in kind of compensatory strategies to make your walking faster or more smooth, but there's definitely other factors that can contribute. So, for example, some individuals experience spasticity and that limits their ability to walk, or vestibular issues that makes balancing a challenge. And so it's really important, I think, as a take home to consider working with a physical therapist, someone who is used to working with individuals with MS. We have neurologic physical therapists, and they can help you to target or isolate the systems that are really driving changes in your own walking, and then target those with specific impairments with specific exercises.
We're going to circle back to that in just a moment. We heard from Jenna, who tells us that she's been experiencing walking difficulties over the last year, and now she uses a cane to help her get around. This change in her mobility is leaving Jenna feeling frustrated, and she's wondering if her gait problems can be temporary or are they forever?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say at the outset that many people with MS experience changes in walking function over time or with disease progression. And we talked about all these many systems that contribute to walking function. So often those systems can actually be improved with training. So for example, if you sit for most of your day or are relatively inactive, then increasing activity and participating in strength training can improve walking function. Or if you have fatigue that really limits how far you can walk or how much you're able to walk, there's targeted aerobic and strengthening programs that can reduce fatigue and therefore help you improve your walking function. So it really depends on what the underlying deficits are or what the drivers of changes in gait function are. But I think the answer is, for the most part, yes, we can change those things.
Now, falling is a major concern for people who are living with MS, especially for those people who are already dealing with gait problems. There have been several studies that report somewhere between 50 and 70% of the people living with MS will fall at least once within any 6-month period. Why are falls so common among people with MS?
Well, MS results in lesions anywhere in the central nervous system. So we're thinking about the brain and the spinal cord. And as a result, people can have kind of variable presentations of MS. Some people start with eye dysfunction, other people with weakness or changes in sensory function. But these changes, which are relatively common across MS, weakness, sensory changes, changes in cognitive function, can all contribute to an increased fall risk. So having many of these declines and then coupling them with things like fatigue or spasticity, those can also lead to increased fall risk.
Can you talk about how falling affects people with MS, both physically and psychologically?
Yeah, sure. So physically, we think about, injuries that might result from a fall. So there's, of course, those consequences. But also what we tend to find, at least in the literature, is that falls result in increased activity over time. So people who experience a fall tend to be less active moving forward from that fall. And I think part of that can be related to not wanting to have another fall, but also potentially related to injuries if they are present. And so in addition to contributing to maybe deconditioning by being less active, falls are also associated with an increase in social isolation. So people not going out quite as often, reductions in mental health, and then an increase in fear of falling, which is this idea of having kind of some anxiety about having a fall and therefore reducing the amount of activity that you do. And of course, that leads to more deconditioning and weaker strength. So kind of this self-perpetuating cycle.
Well, what can someone do to reduce their risk of falling?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really great question. And I think there's a few ways we can come at it. The best possible answer is to start exercising and being active before balance and falling become an issue. That's the ideal answer, but that doesn't always happen. So if you are not in a position where you can start exercising before you've had a fall, there's still things that you can do. So the first thing you can do is to set a goal of becoming more active. A lot of times we'll recommend wearing a pedometer or a step counter or using your watch or your phone that has step counter on it, and set goals for increasing your steps over the course of the week. So just working on sitting less and moving more. If you're not ambulatory, you can work on increasing your aerobic activity or capacity in other ways, like using an arm cycle or participating in seated exercise. You can also practice transfers or start a standing program and set goals around standing. So just sitting less and standing more. And then, of course, I'll always recommend asking for a referral to a physical therapist for specific strategies just for you that you can then follow up with regular exercise or even working with a trainer and in a gym or an outpatient setting.
In spite of careful planning, if someone does take a fall, are there any strategies to help reduce their risk of more serious injury?
Yeah, so you can work on how to fall with your physical therapist, and it's largely related to how you land, and also relaxing your body during the fall as opposed to tensing up, which is much easier to talk about than it is to do. Um, but you can work on strategies for getting up off the floor too if you do fall. So there are some strategies that you can work on if you think falls might be an inevitability.
You've led a lot of interesting research about fall risk and detection, including some studies that compared forward walking and backward walking. Tell us what you and your team learned from those studies and how the outcome of those studies might impact future assessments and treatment for people with MS.
Well, I'm always happy to talk about our work. We've been studying backward walking for a while now as a potential outcome for predicting fall risk in MS. And a lot of times people will say, why backward walking? How did you come to this? And I think there's a few reasons why we arrived here. Number one is that most falls happen in the backward direction. And number two is that we actually do a lot of backward stepping during our everyday lives. So we back up from the refrigerator. Every time you pull a door open, you back up a few steps. You go to sit down in a chair, you back up a couple of steps. But we don't do a lot of sustained backward walking, like over a distance. And so it makes it this sort of novel task, or it's not an automatic task that we can do without thinking. So when we compare backward walking to forward walking, it requires more cognitive resources. You have to pay attention a little bit more. You have to rely more on proprioceptive cues, so understanding where you are in space. It requires more cardiovascular demands than forward walking. It relies on different leg muscles than forward walking. And so there's a lot of differences between the two. And so what we've been able to show in our studies is that backward walking is actually more sensitive to detecting fallers from non-fallers than forward walking. And that was really interesting to us because the currently available tools that we use as physical therapists in the clinic to try to understand who's a faller is usually forward walking or some balance measure, like a Berg balance test or a mini BEST test. But in general, these tests only have like a predictive accuracy around 50%. So not any better than just flipping a coin. So we wanted to know, can we do a little bit better than that? And so in our study, we actually showed that backward walking velocity, so how fast you walk in the backward direction, was the single best discriminator between fallers and non-fallers, even when we considered forward walking and the measure of disease severity, the EDSS. And so that was really exciting because it's easy and quick, and you don't need any special tools to measure backward walking velocity, just a stopwatch in the clinic.
I think you started to answer my next question. I know you and your team explored whether cognition influences the relationship between backward walking and falls among people with MS. What did you learn?
Yeah, this study was actually just put in print in the International Journal of MS Care. So we're thrilled that it's finally out and about. But as you said, we really wanted to understand, now we saw this relationship between backward walking and falls, and we wanted to know if cognition or someone's cognitive status would modify or moderate that relationship. So did you have to have a reduction in your cognition in order for this relationship between backward walking and falls to be present? And what we found is actually no evidence of moderation. So the relationship between backward walking and falls exists regardless of comorbid cognitive impairment. And that was actually really exciting to us because what that implies is that backward walking may actually be a really sensitive marker of fall risk, and it provides some additional evidence to support looking further at this tool.
The cerebellum is the portion of the brain in the back of the head, sits just above where the neck meets the skull. You and your colleagues studied how the cerebellum may contribute to motor and cognitive control in people with MS. So I have a two-part question for you. First, can you tell us why the cerebellum is important, and what did your research show?
Absolutely. So the cerebellum is a really critical brain area for control of balance and walking. It communicates a lot with the motor cortex, which is like our motor planning kind of areas, as well as brain areas like the basal ganglia, which have critical roles in modulating movement. And the cerebellum in particular is very important for adapting movement and ensuring smooth movement coordination. So because we know that for a long time, we've associated the cerebellum with movement, but recent work has suggested that there's a role for the cerebellum, not just in motor and vestibular kinds of functions, but also in cognition, emotion, and even autonomic function. And so there's been some studies looking at specifically individuals who've had posterior cerebellar lobe dysfunction or lesions, and they've been able to show that these individuals actually have specific deficits in cognitive domains like executive functioning or visual spatial memory and processing. So when we think about how that's related to our work, being able to walk and navigate an environment relies in part on being able to understand where things are in that environment. So when you think about visual spatial processing, you're having an understanding of the world around you as you move through it. So you can understand how these two components of mobility and cognition might work together and be really important. So our recent work was in a cohort of individuals with MS and then age and sex matched healthy controls. And we wanted to understand if there would be differences between persons with MS and controls, not only in the volume of the cerebellum and the different lobules of the cerebellum, but also with another kind of MRI imaging called diffuser tensor imaging. And so we looked not only at the diffusivity of water through these different lobules, but also the volume of those lobules. And what our work suggests is that even though there's no difference in the volume of the cerebellum between persons with MS and healthy controls, there are differences in diffusivity. So we see that there's changes in the microstructural integrity of the white matter within these different cerebellar lobules. And also within the superior cerebellar peduncle, which is the major output of the cerebellum coming back to the brain. And that those changes then are associated with changes in mobility and cognition. So that highlights this dual role of the cerebellum in motor and cognitive functioning in MS.
You'll be presenting your research at the 12th International Symposium on Gait and Balance in Multiple Sclerosis. This year's theme is Neural Control of Mobility in MS, Process to Practice. What can you tell us about the symposium and, more broadly, how meetings like this help advance research and treatments for people with MS?
This is the 12th Gait and Balance Symposium, and it brings together professionals, including clinicians and researchers in the field of MS, gait, and balance. This meeting's been remote for the last few years, as many meetings have been. So it will be really great to be back together in person. It's a wonderful place to network and form collaborations and to share the latest evidence that advances research and treatments for individuals with MS. Every year, there's a particular theme that's focused on. This year, as you said, it's the neural control of mobility. But in the past, there's been a focus on fatigue, for instance, or cognition, or sensation, or neuroplasticity, among other topics. So all the talks focus around that theme. And it's generally a very good discussion. So this year, we're really excited to talk more about how structural and functional changes in the brain are related to the kind of motor performance and cognitive performance that we see clinically, and how we might be able to use that information to drive targeted treatments to improve function in persons with MS.
Untreated gait problems can lead to emotional distress, physical injury, added fatigue, and reduced independence. So let's talk about strategies to manage gait problems and treatments that can help. What's the first thing someone should do if they notice their gait or their balance is off?
In my opinion, the first thing you would do is ask for a referral to physical therapy. Physical therapists are trained to be investigators to figure out where problems are stemming from. So really isolating those different systems that we spoke about earlier to understand what's driving the changes in walking or balance that you're experiencing. And so then they can provide you with a targeted training program to help improve those specific areas. So in my opinion, that's the first thing you would do.
And to your point, what types of exercises might a physical therapist recommend to help with gait problems?
So I think it really depends on what the root cause is. So it might be one system, it might be multiple systems. So the treatment might include some targeted strength training of specific muscles. It could include practicing balance under different conditions. It might include like specific coordination kinds of exercises. There's a lot of timing involved in walking. You have to be able to, pair together many different movements in order to walk in a smooth, coordinated manner. So maybe you'd be working specifically on some of those timing related issues. It very much depends upon what the primary drivers of walking dysfunction are.
Are there things that people can do at home to address their gait problems?
Absolutely. So you'll want to have a general wellness program at baseline. That would be great, where you're walking or exercising and trying to meet the physical activity guidelines set forth for persons with MS. So you can always work on being more active. So that means sitting less and standing more, or sitting less and walking more. So setting goals for your own physical activity or steps or standing and trying to meet those goals over the course of time is a great place to start at home. Could also work on adding strengthening and balance training to your day. So that might include practicing some sit to stands, which is a great strengthening exercise for your legs, or practicing standing with your feet close together or with your eyes closed, always making sure that you're safe first, but trying to challenge some of those systems that are important for walking.
Camera wants to know what kinds of devices or equipment might be available to improve mobility and safety.
So there's a variety of different devices. So when you're thinking about devices during walking, you might think about something like a cane or a walker. You might also think about something like walking poles or trekking poles. Those are common ones that we'll prescribe in the clinic. So I always try to go for the least restrictive device that would promote independence and encourage endurance, but without being too restrictive. But you want to be smart about the type of device that you're picking. So some people do okay with just unilateral one-sided support, and others need bilateral, one on each side. The trekking poles are usually pretty well accepted because not only are they bilateral and allow for kind of quick and coordinated movement and turning, but usually they are telescoping, so you can fold them right up and stick them in your bag. So that's one that people tend to like. If you are going to use a walker, I usually recommend the four-wheeled walker with the handbrakes and the seat. I like that the front wheels are casters, so they turn easier and allow for better balance during turns, as opposed to a walker that you might have to actually pick up during a turn, not as stable. But I think the important thing is to work with your healthcare providers to try out different devices and see what's the best one for you. And a lot of times people will tell me, I don't want to use a device. I don't like using assistive devices. And one of the ways that I try to work with those individuals might be, if I think that they could benefit from a device, is to ask them to try using the device while they're exercising, because it will tend to allow them to exercise for longer. It allows you to save energy a little bit by using the device for some of your stability as opposed to just your own self. And so you might get a little bit more exercise in if you use the device, and it's a good way to kind of start off with a mobility aid.
Damien's wondering if there are medications that can help improve some of the symptoms that are known risk factors of falling. And I'll also ask you the flip side of that question. Are there some medications used for MS symptoms that might increase someone's risk of falling?
Yeah, so this is certainly not my area of expertise, but what I do know is there was a nice paper that came out in 2015 that looked exactly at this question. Were there certain medications that were related to an increased risk for falls? And they found that antidepressants like SSRIs, for example, were associated with an increased odds for falling. But that disease modifying therapies, on the other hand, were associated with a 48% decreased odds of falling. So I thought that was really interesting. You may have also heard of this 4-aminopyridine or dalfampridine drug that is given often for improved walking. And I will say that in some individuals, it seems to work quite well, but it doesn't seem to work well in everyone. So it's definitely one of those things to have a trial with and talk with your healthcare provider about whether it would be helpful for you, and also if any of your other medications might have an impact on falls.
We heard from Stephanie, who used to be an avid runner until she started tripping over her own feet. Stephanie told us that she was eventually diagnosed with foot drop. Can you tell us what foot drop is and whether there are strategies to help manage it?
Foot drop describes this phenomenon of the toes dropping during the swing phase of gait. That's the part of gait where you are walking, where you're swinging your leg forward with your step. Foot drop results in people catching their toes or even dragging their foot as they pull their leg through. And it's usually caused by weakness in the dorsiflexors, which are muscles on the front part of the leg that are responsible for holding the toes up during that swing phase. There's a few strategies to manage this. One is peripheral nerve stimulation. So you may have seen like a walk aid or a Bioness, and it provides stimulation over the peroneal nerve, which is responsible for triggering those dorsiflexor muscles. And another strategy that's commonly used is an ankle foot orthosis. So this is a brace that fits into the shoe and helps hold the toes up during the swing phase.
Well, you've shared some really helpful insights on gait, balance, and mobility with us today, Dr. Fritz. What would you say are the top 3 takeaways that you'd like our viewers to remember?
I think when we're thinking about our walking and balance, some takeaways should be to set goals for becoming more physically active or for sitting less and moving or standing more. A second goal would be to meet with a physical therapist regularly and set individualized goals, including a wellness program. And if possible, to do this before you even have a fall. I think that would be the ideal. And then the third take home would be to think about the idea that difficulty walking results from a variety of different systems. We have some nice evidence to show that these changes in walking and balancing are related to structural changes in the brain. But we also know that we can improve those systems with training and specific practice. So it's important to realize that you might be able to improve your walking and balance over time.
Thank you for sharing your expertise with us, Dr. Fritz. I think we have time for one more question from one of our viewers. Connie has read that music therapy has been used to help people with Parkinson's disease who have difficulty walking. Do you know if this type of therapy is helpful and available for people with MS?
So there has been some emerging evidence coming out of the Cleveland Clinic looking at music therapy in MS. And what they've shown is that walking to the beat or walking to specific music that has a strong beat can help to improve walking over time. I think the idea is that you start out at one particular beat, and over time you increase the beat of the music that you're listening to in an effort to increase walking speed over time. The original studies in Parkinson's disease used a metronome and increased the pace of the metronome over time. But now that's been kind of transitioned to music, and it's a little bit more fun to listen to than a metronome.
Well, I want to thank everyone who submitted questions, and thank you, Dr. Fritz, for being with us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Today's program survey has now been posted in the chat for your feedback. Please take a minute and complete it to help us create programs and topics with you in mind. Please be sure to visit the National MS Society's website for information and resources on MS, connection opportunities, and ways for you to get involved. You can also connect with an MS Navigator to receive personalized support by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. A recording of today's program will be posted on the MS Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. Finally, I'll invite you to join me each week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where we continue the conversation that we start here. You can find Real Talk MS on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Thanks for joining us for Ask an MS Expert. We'll see you next week.